Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. How did high-risk offender Randall Hopley disappear?
You know, there's a huge HR issue happening out there. We see it in our hospitals. It's the same with corrections and the parole board. Do we have individuals who are properly trained to assess risk?
Where the system failed and who's to blame? Plus, RCMP say Canada is investigating threats against Air India after an online video suggests people should not fly with the airline. And the much-anticipated return of the Stanley Park Christmas train is met with frustration.
And the queue allowed us in, and we still were not able to select any time, any date, any category.
After tickets sold out before many people could get their hands on them.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janella Hamilton. Dan is off tonight. It's been nearly 1 week since high-risk offender Randall Hopley disappeared from his Vancouver halfway house. And late this afternoon, the VPD released new pictures of Hopley taken the day he left on November 4th. The VPD says he is likely traveling on foot. He'll be using cash to make purchases. He's also known to frequent dollar stores, sewing supply stores, and Walmarts. VPD suspects he will be making attempts to change his appearance and hide his face when in the public. Now, there's been plenty of blame thrown around between politicians and within the criminal justice system. So our John Hernandez took a closer look on exactly who was responsible for watching Hopley and where the system may have failed.
How does a man with an extensive criminal background who is supposed to be under intense supervision disappear? Well, there's no shortage of blame.
The parole board did not place adequate controls on him.
The Premier needs to stop trying to blame Ottawa for every single thing. Look in the mirror.
Rather than jail, he got bail to a halfway house.
Legal experts say some of it's justified, but some of it's not. Randall Hopley served 6 years in prison for child abduction. He was released in 2018 and put under a court-ordered long-term supervision order. The parole board mandated conditions included staying away from kids, an ankle bracelet, and living in a halfway house.
Well, it's a bit of a nightmare for the National Parole Board, isn't it?
This former Crown prosecutor says the parole board's conditions should be scrutinized.
What type of risk was assessed, and were the proper conditions put in place for Mr. Hopley to reside in the community safely?
Hopley allegedly violated his orders last November, accused of using a computer in a library near kids. He was later arrested. Prosecutors argued he should stay in jail, but the court released him on bail. Politicians, including BC's Premier, have suggested impending bail reform legislation, or Bill C-48, could have kept him behind bars. But lawyers say that's not true. The law would only apply to those alleged to have committed a new violent act.
What Mr. Hopley is accused of having done here is breaching the conditions of his LTESO. So he's not as if he's out there and he committed a new violent offense.
So Hopley went back to this halfway house. Last week he left, cut off his ankle bracelet, and hasn't been seen since. So people are asking, should workers here have kept a closer eye on him?
Viewing the halfway house harshly, I think, is a bit premature.
This former police officer says the federally funded halfway houses shouldn't bear blame.
They are severely underfunded. They are understaffed by and large. They don't have the resources to provide the necessary supervision and rehabilitative programming.
Resourcing challenges, these lawyers say, also extend to the parole board and correctional service, which were ultimately responsible for monitoring Hopley in the community.
There's a huge HR issue happening out there. We see it in our hospitals. It's the same with corrections and the parole board. Do we have individuals who are properly trained to assess risk?
A series of failures, igniting a Canada-wide search that's now in its 7th day. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
It's been a busy month for the NDP government in Victoria. They've tabled a sweeping new set of housing bills signaling moves that they say will add supply and make things more affordable. As Emily Vance reports, those in the industry say it's a fundamental shift in how housing is approved in BC, but not every move is being welcomed.
And so we have to meet the moment. We know that there's a need for housing. We have to do things differently.
In less than 2 weeks, Minister of Housing Ravi Kahlon has rolled out several major pieces of legislation that will change how housing is approved in BC. Mandatory upzoning on single-family lots, adding density near transit infrastructure, and an overhaul of the municipal planning system. Developers say the changes will take some time, but have the potential to reduce land prices by streamlining the building approval process.
It should change the speculation on land because there's a certainty of what is available and what that land can be used for and what fees and charges the builder will pay to the municipality to get that built.
The official opposition party isn't so sure. BC United says they don't support the majority of the changes and they'll release their own housing plan before the end of the year.
The rushed nature, the lack of credible answers on a lot of basic questions leads me to believe that this is more about politics than about real good public policy.
The province says more details will roll out in the coming weeks. For municipal leaders, those details will be crucial.
Introducing legislation is the easy part. The hard part will be that implementation of these policies. And once we start the implementation, we're going to reveal the gaps that are there. And we're going to now get to know the practical challenges that were not addressed in the legislation.
Mandewo said local governments are concerned about increased strain on infrastructure, costs related to planning, and who will pay for all the extra costs. The province says they will work with local governments.
This isn't something that we just created on the back of a napkin a couple of weeks ago. This is work that's been happening for years.
Local governments have until the end of June to make large-scale changes around single-family zoning and add density around transit hubs. Emily Vance, CBC News, Victoria.
The province says more than 1 million flu vaccines have been administered to British Columbians so far this season, as well as more than 840,000 COVID vaccines.
This is the season when people come together most for holiday-related events, and this is therefore a very important time and a very important opportunity, if you have not yet been vaccinated, to get vaccinated.
The province also says COVID-19 activity appears to be waning after a recent surge, with deaths and test positivity rates declining.
COVID is leveling off in our hospitals as well. At last count, there were 244 people in BC in hospital with a positive COVID test.
However, the government cautions respiratory illness season is just getting started and says it's preparing for a possible rise in hospitalizations for all seasonal illnesses. Federal Transport Minister Pablo Rodriguez and the RCMP say an investigation is underway into what they call threats against Air India. As Chad Pawson explains, the investigation was launched after an online video urged people not to fly on the airline starting on November 19th.
Canadian authorities say they're looking into comments circulating online and social media posts. They're attributed to Gurpatwant Singh Panoon. He's a U.S.-based organizer of unofficial referendums on Sikh independence, including recent votes in Surrey. At least one video CBC News has seen does reference, quote, a danger to life involving Air India flights. Panoon says his comments have been misconstrued and edited. He maintains he's only asking for a boycott of Air India and other businesses that support the Indian government.
So while we are doing the Khalistan referendum to challenge India's territorial integrity, we want to boycott Air India and other Indian businesses to kill their economic hegemony.
Still, the RCMP says police are collaborating with domestic and international partners and industry stakeholders. Panoon says there is no threat to Air India flights, only a protest in the form of a boycott. Chad Pawson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, move over Taylor Swift. There's a new hot ticket in town. The Stanley Park Christmas train is back in service after 2 years of repairs off the tracks. But as Yasmin Gandam reports, the excitement was short-lived after tickets sold out in a flash yesterday.
Adina Bibi and 3 of her family members signed on right away to try to get tickets for the train. But to her disappointment, none were available.
I didn't really understand what was going on. It was super important to us, so we were scrambling and trying to figure out what we could do.
Bibi says riding the train has been a holiday season tradition in her family for almost 40 years. The train has not been running since 2021, but even then, Bibi says they were all aboard for the next best thing.
But we haven't missed a year. Even those years they were closed, we actually all came together and put it up on a virtual YouTube channel and then pretended we were there.
This year, there is one Bright Nights locomotive with 3 carriages running. The original fleet consisted of 4 locomotives and 13 passenger carriages running. Pre-pandemic capacity was 560 rides an hour. This year, capacity is at 120 rides an hour. Bibi says the reduced capacity is frustrating and the website wasn't user-friendly.
If it wasn't a glitch, how were we online at the time that it opened? And the queue allowed us in, and we still were not able to select any time, any date, any category.
The Christmas train is part of Bright Nights, which is the biggest fundraiser of the year for the BC Professional Firefighters Burn Fund. Last year, when the trains were out of commission completely, their donations took a 50% hit.
One train is better than no trains that we had last year, and we're just going to continue on and, really try and make it special for anybody who we have the honor of hosting, who comes by and sees your firefighters at Stanley Park.
The event runs from November 30th to January 1st, but Bright Nights is so much more than the train. Firefighters give out candy canes, Santa will be there, and those who weren't able to snag a train ticket can still enjoy the Stanley Park lights on foot. Yasmin Gandam, CBC News, Vancouver.
TransLink is gearing up for the winter weather in Metro Vancouver as temperatures start to drop. A new winter-rated tire featuring a different tread pattern will be tested on about 500 buses. The tires are 3-peak mountain snowflake rated, which is the highest winter rating available, but is also the same rating which applies to the current winter tires on buses. TransLink says last year's early winter is prompting them to prepare sooner.
It got us to be much more cognizant of readiness sooner, because last year's winter storm in November was unusually early. So we've moved up our readiness, and our winter planning, as Mike mentioned, started in early fall.
TransLink also says when freezing temperatures are in the forecast, additional staff will be called in and SkyTrains will run overnight to prevent snow and ice buildup. A wind and rainstorm heading our way has prompted the cancellation of many BC ferry sailings. Trips between Tsawwassen and both Swartz Bay and Departure Bay are canceled for the evening. Sailings from between Horseshoe Bay and the island, as well as some sailings to and from the Sunshine Coast, are canceled. The Bowen Island ferry remains unaffected. There are additional cancellations on more minor routes. If you are trying to catch a ferry tonight, it's best to check the BC Ferries website before heading to the terminal. Darius Madavi joins us now with our first look at our weather. Darius, are we going to be seeing more rain, sunshine, or dare I say snow?
Yes, it looks like we have all of the above in the forecast. The interior is still looking a little bit sunny, not tonight, but clearer skies tonight and potentially on Sunday as well. But they are getting the remnants of the system that is currently hitting parts of the coast pretty hard. So in here, in purple, we have wind warning, so still expecting some high winds gusting, potentially above 100 kilometers per hour for the North Island and Central Coast. Meanwhile, for the Sunshine Coast, the east coast of the island, down to the South Island, and here in Metro Vancouver, as well as Howe Sound, we're looking at winds gusting consistently 70, gusting to 90, potentially even higher over the next 12 hours or so, potentially even into tomorrow afternoon. We also have a rainfall warning in place for the Fraser Valley and Metro Vancouver, the North Shore in particular. Up to 100 millimeters are possible for the North Shore, closer to 80 millimeters possible for the Fraser Valley, although it's unlikely it'll be quite that much. And then we also have snowfall warnings or winter weather statements for the mountain passes in the interior. As well, they have closed part of Highway 1 from parts of Hope to Lytton as well, from Boston Bar, actually. So expect pretty serious conditions heading into tonight, into tomorrow in the interior. You can see all that rain and wind coming already here on the coast. We do have all that snow building up at the higher elevations, as well as rainfall here on the coast, and expect that as we look at the next 48 hours or so, some incredibly high buildup of precipitation for the island as well. So it's going to be a bit of a messy weekend, especially if you're planning to travel.
Thanks so much, Darius.
Thanks, Janella.
A man has been arrested after allegedly stealing a poppy donation box in Port Moody. Police say that on Monday night, a man in his 50s took a donation bin off the counter of a shop in Port Moody's Newport Village. The suspect fled, but officers arrested him in a nearby city days later. One officer says it's unclear how much money was stolen, and it's unlikely it will be returned.
These donations are slated to go back to folks who have served our country and fought for our freedoms. And, you know, it's very disrespectful and low to be taking from that.
Zacharias says shop owners should not be discouraged from putting out poppy bins, but they should remain cautious and call police if they suspect a theft. Vancouver Island University and other Nanaimo community partners are remembering fallen soldiers through a video memorial. As Claire Palmer reports, the project acknowledges the contributions of Nanaimo soldiers in the First and Second World Wars.
A 55-minute video on loop on screens at several public locations throughout the city. It features the names of over 200 soldiers Nanaimo remembers, bringing a local perspective to the two world wars.
So I think the thing about Nanaimo that's important is the fact that, you know, we are like everybody else, and we have this shared collective identity of loss that we need to remember. Something that's this shared experience that transcends, you know, community and provincial boundaries.
The project also includes information on the fallen, including their connection to Nanaimo, to bring a human face to each name displayed, and to make them more than just a roll call of the lost and the fallen.
It's very difficult, I think, for the community to go to the cenotaph. They look at those names, they see them carved in stone, and yet, in a way, they're meaningless. They have no context by which to understand their connection to the community. So this is a way to bring those individuals back into the community.
The memorial also includes a special section on Indigenous veterans. It's based on research from the university's elder in resident.
They deserve the same recognition as anyone else that went through what they went through. So it's important for our younger generation to know, was that their great-grandfather, their great-great-uncle? You know, who was he?
Manson says she was inspired by a conversation she had with an elder. He revealed to her he was a veteran, something that wasn't well known. She decided it was important to research Indigenous contributions.
But everything that we hold, we're leaving behind the legacy of who we are and who we were, right from the old ancestors to us, to carry on forward.
The project has been on display since November 1st and will continue to be displayed until Remembrance Day. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Nanaimo.
Volunteers with the Last Post Fund are aiming to ensure veterans are given a proper burial and gravestone as they work to identify soldiers in unmarked graves so their families can commemorate them. Our Ali Partargay joins veteran and volunteer Glenn Smith at Abbotsford's Hazelwood Cemetery to learn more about the work he does.
My name is Glenn Smith. I'm a member of the Last Post Fund BC branch. I look for veterans' unmarked graves, and when I find them, I do a little bit of research, put a file together, and in due course, a headstone is approved and placed in the cemetery.
So Glenn, we're in Hazelwood Cemetery in Abbotsford, and there is a number of veterans buried here, and some of them their graves are not marked. So how do
Correct.
we know if you come across an unmarked grave of a veteran?
Well, what I do, Ali, is I will attend the cemetery. And as a matter of fact, this is a really good example here. There's 2 markers of veterans. 2 here, and then there's a space. Then there's some more veterans markers. But in this space, I would look at that and initially think, well, that's perhaps a spot where a veteran lies and his or her grave is not marked. As this is an unmarked space in the cemetery between 2 existing military markers, my next move would be to go talk to the cemetery coordinator at Hazelmere Cemetery here and ask him if he knows if it's an unmarked grave of a veteran. And if he knows that information, I'll go with that, do some research, identify who the veteran is, put a file together and send that information off to our national office in Montreal where the information is vetted. I don't get to meet a lot of living descendants of veterans. World War I obviously was over 100 years ago. There aren't many World War II veterans alive today, but some of their descendants are still living. I was contacted by an elder that lives in Chilliwack. She had grown up in the Samath First Nation in Abbotsford here and told me that her uncle, a World War II veteran, is buried in the Hillgard Cemetery and his grave is unmarked. And she asked if I could help out and possibly get a headstone for her uncle. That one has a special place in my heart because it is an Indigenous veteran involved, and I have been able to talk with a living descendant of that veteran. It gives me a sense of pride knowing that I've assisted a family member in having a headstone placed on their family member's unmarked grave. Giving these graves a headstone gives that veteran's identity back to those families.
Movember fundraising is well on its way. How one Coquitlam firefighter is raising thousands of dollars for the cause and changing conversations around men's mental health after the break. Thank you for joining our commercial-free live stream. A 99-year-old St. John's World War I memorial is getting a makeover. And as Terry Roberts reports, it includes a new tomb for unknown soldiers.
For 99 years, the focal point of remembrance in St. John's, the Newfoundland National War Memorial, unveiled in 1924. Before a crowd of thousands, when Newfoundland was a self-governing dominion, a quarter century before joining Canada. Sacred ground, lifelike bronze statues, honoring the sacrifice and courage of those who served, and those who died in large numbers at places like Beaumont-Hamel in northern France, where the 800-strong Royal Newfoundland Regiment was decimated on July 1st, 1916. But this Remembrance Day, the memorial is a construction site. A $6 million makeover is underway.
That is going to be a monumental change to the site, one that we've been looking for some time.
Renovating a century-old National Historic Site is a delicate job to preserve the artistic integrity and reverence of the memorial. At the same time, add something new. And it's something that begins far from here. Hundreds of soldiers from the Newfoundland Regiment are buried in northern France, many with no known grave. One of those soldiers will be exhumed, and after all this while, he'll come home, here to St. John's, and laid to rest in a new tomb of the unknowns at the base of the memorial. This somber homecoming will take place on July 1st, 2024, on the 100th anniversary of the first Memorial Day here so long ago.
It's going to be a very significant day.
This is the man building the tomb, just 30 years old, owner of a stone fabrication company and quarry of rare granite in central Newfoundland. The great-grandson of a man who fought in both world wars and has no known grave because he was lost at sea after his ship was torpedoed.
This is the remains of a soldier that might have fought alongside of my great-grandfather.
Few have seen the tomb. There's months of work still to do. Engravings, details, final touches.
All we know is that the vault is made from this material. It's called black gabbro. Very rare, only found right here.
So this was a rock that was a potential piece for the tomb.
Here's a sketch. The vault made from the gabbro in Bishop's Falls. The cover is labradorite, making the tomb rooted in the soil of this province. Mark Brace is humbled to be part of it.
It's just like taking home Stanley Cup, I think.
Meanwhile, while the work and waiting is underway for the return of an unknown soldier, this war memorial in the heart of Old St. John's is back to its original purpose.
We are kind of going back in history, so I think it's a nice thing, and this is a beautiful historic war memorial.
This year, the Warrant Officer and Sergeant's Memorial on Queen Street will be the site of the main remembrance ceremony on November 11th, the first time in 99 years. Terry Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
Since the start of the month, some men have been growing out their facial hair for Movember. The campaign is marking its 20th year in raising money for prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and men's mental health. Our Yasmin Renea spoke with a Coquitlam firefighter who's raising thousands of dollars for the cause.
Why is it important to raise awareness and funds for men's health?
Men don't talk about their health very often, and when we do, it's in short clips and then we move on. It's something that once we start talking about it more and start being more comfortable with, men will stop dying younger, and that's kind of the main cause.
You've had a very personal experience with this. Can you tell me about it?
Yeah, I had testicular cancer 10 years ago. It was something that I never knew that could happen to me, and I was shocked when it did. It's the testicular cancer is the most common cancer for men between 18 and 40, and we don't talk about it. I was never aware of it, and so it was a gut punch when I found out, and it kind of shook my whole world and realized that we don't talk about it at all amongst ourselves. And so I've kind of taken the reins and started talking to other men and women in my life about talking to their men and women in their life about things like this. So,
why do you think these things weren't talked about?
I think it's a little bit of shame, a little bit of masculinity. It's tough to really pinpoint one reason why, but I know we've always been taught as young boys that you have to be strong, you have to be tough, you have to be rock solid for everyone around you, when in reality being rock solid and being tough and being strong is saying that you have a problem, whether it be mentally or physically, and being able to get help and reach out without feeling shame or discomfort.
How has talking about men's mental health changed within the fire halls over the past decade that you've worked here?
It's changed immensely in my time in the fire service. We all talk amongst ourselves, and we sit down when we have coffee, we talk about our calls, and we talk about how it may or may not have affected us, and some guys it will, and some guys it won't, and everyone's a little bit different in that respect. But we have a great support system here. We have a peer support system here as well, which, if there is a bad call, we do get pulled out of service, and we do get put into a meeting where we talk about what happened and how it affected us, and we kind of go from there, which is great. So I think the systems in place now are much better than they were 2 or 3 decades ago.
What are you doing this year to fundraise for Movember?
For this month, what I do is I typically do a grassroots kind of fundraising campaign. I work a lot through social media, just through my Instagram and my Facebook and Twitter a little bit. And what I do is I ask for donations, and when I get a donation from someone, usually what I'll do is I'll post a photo of them on my Instagram saying thank you, kind of explaining a little bit of how I know them, and then that seemed to kind of snowball into more and more people because they want to see what funny photos I find or how I remember meeting them or knowing them. It's really gained a lot of traction. Between that and just word of mouth, I usually gain between 6 to 10 grand a month.
So that's your goal for this one?
More or less, yeah. I mean, anything above that is awesome, but we have a small team here in Coquitlam that does the Movember Team Challenge as well, and we usually raise around 10 to 12 grand with those guys as well, which is really great.
That was our Yasmin Khanea speaking with firefighter Mike Payne. You can follow his fundraising journey on his Instagram at PayneTrain33. Edmonton police say a child was deliberately killed during a gang-related shooting. We'll have the latest on the investigation after the break.
With every bite of the chainsaw, BC comes closer to being branded as the next Brazil, the bad boy of the international environmental movement.
Really, you don't want to do that. I'm not doing it. You just step back. This is dangerous.
In San Francisco, protesters used a giant inflatable chainsaw to get the attention of a huge customer for the BC paper industry, the phone book business. They want the people at the Yellow Pages convention to stop buying Canadian.
Greenpeace, its work in Europe, in the UK, and also in Germany, has persuaded major publishers there to commit themselves to not buy clear-cut pulp from Canada.
This is in Clayoquot Sound.
It is true that clear-cutting continues not just in famous places like Clayoquot Sound on Vancouver Island, but all over BC's virgin forests.
Across British Columbia, these ancient temperate rainforests continue to be clear-cut logged.
The work in the forest industry.
The BC government and the industry came to San Francisco too to say they are improving.
Clear cutting is the most common form of harvesting in BC. Having said that, clear cutting is a practice that is evolving and going through a lot of changes.
Some BC loggers came too to remind environmentalists about jobs.
We've got people out of work all over the place.
The industry is telling customers that the changes are real. Fewer jobs, smaller clear cuts, more concern for salmon streams, and more forest off limits.
There's no evidence yet that the giant Yellow Page publishers are actually cancelling contracts for BC paper, but they are coming under tremendous pressure, and for Canada, the stakes are not merely millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. It's more like billions of dollars and thousands of jobs.
You know, in Canada, the forest products business is a $50 billion business, and because we export so much of it, we export about 80% of what we produce. We are Canada's most important earner of foreign exchange.
But the international protests about Clayoquot Sound were just the beginning. Now all of BC's immense bounty of forests is becoming famous and controversial. Terry Malewski, CBC News, San Francisco.
Police in Edmonton say an 11-year-old boy was deliberately killed during a gang-related shooting. As Madeline Cummings reports, the child's father was also killed.
Like, that is sick and twisted, and I think most gang members would agree.
Edmonton police say 41-year-old Harpreet Uppal and his 11-year-old son were killed in a vehicle yesterday. The shooting happened in broad daylight near a daycare with suburban shoppers around. Officers found the father and son in medical distress around noon on Thursday, and despite help from paramedics, both died from their injuries on the scene. Another child, a friend of Uppal's son, managed to escape the vehicle after the shooting. Police say Uppal, who was high up in the drug and gang world, was followed and targeted. And it wasn't the first time. He was shot at 2 years ago while eating dinner with his family in a restaurant.
There have been attempts on his life, and we had worked very hard over the years to try to warn and give him opportunities to step out of that lifestyle and keep him and his family safe.
Police say this incident and others mark a change, with violent gangsters no longer sparing innocent children and bystanders.
Sadly, is that once the shooter or the shooters learned that the son was there, they intentionally killed him, shot and killed him. So he was not caught in a crossfire or killed by mistake.
Police say they don't know why Uppel was targeted. Court documents show he was facing charges for cocaine possession and trafficking, plus the illegal possession of body armor. Police believe a burned vehicle found north of Beaumont is linked to the killings, and the suspect's vehicle is believed to be a black 2012 BMW. In South Edmonton today, fear and sadness.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, the kid was stripped of his life. The parents, the family is now torn up because of it. The community is now shaken up because of it.
I've been in touch with a number of community members. Obviously, people are really shaken up, and people are really worried. Right now I'm reaching out, I'm listening, and to see what kind of after-incident support we can provide.
Police say they've responded to nearly 200 shootings this year. Compared to the same time period last year, that's a 46% increase. Police don't want to create fear, but they're telling Edmontonians to be aware of their surroundings and to not put themselves in risky situations. Madeline Cummings, CBC News, Edmonton.
Bloodshed continued in the Middle East today. The Hamas-run health ministry says Israeli airstrikes hit 3 Gaza hospitals, including 2 where displaced people had taken refuge. And as CBC's Tom Perry reports, Canadians trying to flee Gaza were once again left stranded at the Egyptian border.
People continue to gather on the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing, hoping to get in, including Canadians. Akram al-Sabah's daughter back in Canada has been worried for her father. He traveled all the way from northern Gaza to be in Rafah today.
In Gaza, situation is a very bad situation over there. You can't find food, you can't find bread, you can't find the water. But I say thanks for God. I'm here now in the Rafah border. I feel a little bit better, because soon maybe open the door for us.
The Rafah crossing remained closed today. More than 250 Canadians had their name on a list to get out. At Canada's embassy in Cairo, Canada's ambassador talked about the impact the closure was having on getting Canadians out of Gaza.
It's very difficult. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's a bit, I would say, lost in translation. What's happening at the border. Oftentimes it's disagreements between the different parties.
At the embassy, diplomatic staff have been helping Canadians and their families get their paperwork in order and plot their next move. For some, that next step is going to Canada, but others aren't so sure.
We need to take a deep breath. We need to take it slowly before we move back home to Canada. We just need to, we can't be moving from one place to another. So we are just trying to settle down right now, figure out as a family what we're going to do next.
The Canadian Embassy hopes Canadians will start leaving Gaza in greater numbers. So far, just over 100 Canadians have managed to get out, but hundreds more remain trapped. Tom Perry, CBC News, Cairo.
Deadly violence is worsening in the West Bank. More than 160 Palestinians have been killed in that territory alone since the Israeli-Hamas war began almost 5 weeks ago. Meanwhile, Israel is intensifying raids in the territory and has arrested dozens of Palestinians whom they accuse of being militants. As Ellen Morrow reports, thousands of Palestinians marched through the streets in protest. And a warning, this report includes some graphic images.
The anger in this crowd is palpable. Some carry Hamas flags. Rage over the war in Gaza and rising violence here against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Siege, Mazoun Mohammed tells me we're being suffocated. Since the October 7th attacks, 176 Palestinians, including 43 children, says the UN, have been killed in clashes with Israeli security forces. Those security forces also say they've arrested 1,500 people. They come in whenever they like, Mohammed says. They arrest whoever they like. They shoot whoever they like. And this week has been especially violent. Deadly raids by the Israeli military across the West Bank. At the Jenin refugee camp, at least 14 people killed Thursday, after Israeli forces launched a nighttime assault. Israel says it's targeting terrorists, that the raid in Jenin uncovered improvised explosive devices. But to many Palestinians, the raids are just part of a repressive, decades-long military occupation. Here, Israeli troops opened fire at the Al Amari refugee camp near Ramallah. We asked why, but the military did not respond to our request. The raid killed Mohamed Jadil Haq, now considered a martyr in his community. We met his mother, wife, on what would have been Mohamed's 30th birthday. They say he was innocent. He was on his way to work to bring food to the family when they shot him, his mother Khadija tells me. Everybody loved him, says wife Ala. Ala is now a widow at 27 years old, with 2 babies to care for. She tells us the Israelis are more aggressive now than ever before. Palestinians also face intimidation and attacks from some Jewish settlers living in the occupied West Bank in contravention of international law. At Friday prayers in Ramallah, a heaviness hangs over the crowd.
Those are our sisters and brothers that get killed in Gaza. We feel the same thing. Because if they get the chance, they're going to do the same thing in the West Bank also.
That's the anxiety here, with tensions only getting worse. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Ramallah, the occupied West Bank.
Joe Biden is facing increasing pressure to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. American diplomats have warned the U.S. president of growing anger over his position on the conflict. The CBC's Cameron McIntosh has the latest from Washington.
All along, we've heard some Democrats say they are not comfortable with the scale of the Israeli response. Now CNN is reporting it has obtained 2 cables from U.S. diplomats in the Middle East. One in Amman reportedly raises concern the U.S. is, quote, losing Arab publics for a generation. Similar concerns have also been expressed by the embassy in Cairo. Now, President Biden has refused to publicly call for an outright ceasefire, calling that untenable. He's been pushing for pauses in fighting. Now, after weeks of urging, Israel is agreeing to 6-hour tactical pauses to allow civilian evacuation. Still, there are growing signs the administration is not comfortable with what is happening in Gaza. This was Secretary of State Antony Blinken this morning in India.
Much more needs to be done to protect civilians and to make sure that humanitarian assistance reaches them. Far too many Palestinians have been killed. Far too many have suffered these past weeks. And we want to do everything possible to prevent harm to them and to maximize the assistance that gets to them.
As for Biden's support on this, an AP poll today found only 50% of Democrats approve of his handling of the war. With young people, that drops significantly. He's also facing calls from aid agencies, unions, and most recently, a big group of 2020 Biden campaign workers to call for a ceasefire. So this is becoming an issue in his base. All while congressional Democrats demand more transparency about what weapons are being sent to Israel. The bind for Biden, he's facing growing backlash while publicly still trying to support a longtime U.S. ally. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Washington.
It was an animal that hadn't been seen since 1961 and had established a legendary reputation. A rare egg-laying mammal was spotted in Indonesia. Coming up, we'll find out how they found it.
everybody's surprised when they walk on board. They're like, oh, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. And we had a man one time sit down and say, so when's the tour starting? And we're like, well, we're not actually going anywhere. Welcome to the old school bus. So we are a charitable organization, and our mission is to connect generations through arts activities. Basically, we want to break down the stereotypes between generations and offer inclusive, accessible programming for people who are living with dementia, as well as people with physical challenges. Yeah, it's been wonderful, and kids are just like pumped, and so many things to pick at, and there's not a whole lot of limitations in here for anybody, so it's kind of everybody can do anything.
This is our reminiscence kit. So it's a suitcase full of treasures that you might not come across so frequently now. We use them as starting off points for discussions, with older folks. It might be, do you recognize these objects? What do they bring to mind? Do they evoke any emotions? Whereas with young folks, we play some pretty fun games in terms of imagining what the purpose of said objects could be. We do that with seniors and young people together, and they can kind of exchange what their impressions are versus what the actual uses have been of those objects. So in this little nook, we have some books for small people, older songs that have been made into board books or that are about the history of music, Skinamarink, just because it's a classic and everybody loves it. And there's a little busy board where small people can, pretend to drive the bus or turn on the keys of the bus. Again, we're trying to think of every way that each activity can be made accessible to folks as little as 0 and as old as 100.
Why was it so important to have a space that was intergenerational, like where kids and seniors could kind of come together? Why was that so important to create?
Well, honestly, there's not really a space for that. I mean, there are like community centers and that kind of thing, but a lot of those programming are either specifically for seniors or specifically for young people. And it is important because, it helps children with their development, it helps seniors with loneliness, and young people learn so much, and older people learn so much. It's really quite remarkable to see. And there was another gentleman who kept getting phone calls, and it was so funny. He said, they were like, where are you to? And he was like, I'm on the bus. They're like, oh, where are you going? Nowhere. But where are you? I'm on the bus. Where are you going? Nowhere.
Mark your calendars. CBC's annual Food Bank Day is coming up on December 1st. Kick off the holiday season by watching our full day of special programming, streaming online at cbc.ca/foodbankday and on CBC Gem. It's all for an important cause, local food banks across BC. For more information, head to cbc.ca/foodbankday. We'll see you December 1st.
It's the discovery of an animal that hasn't been spotted in more than 60 years. This curious, waddling little beast is an Attenborough long-beaked echidna. It's a bizarre mammal that lays eggs, has spines of a hedgehog, the snout of an anteater, and the feet of a mole. It was captured on a remote camera placed in the mountain range of Indonesia. The animal was last spotted back in 1961, so this had scientists very excited. One biologist who probably is also very excited is David Attenborough. The elusive animal is named after the famous British broadcaster. And of course, our science enthusiast, Darius Madavi, is also very excited about this discovery. Tell us a little bit as to why.
Oh, I love echidnas. Other than them and platypuses, no other mammals lay eggs, which is very cool. Platypuses are also very cool animals with a sort of a weird mix of features, too. And it being named after David Attenborough is pretty cool. If any biologists are watching, you're welcome to name an animal after me. You're welcome. You totally can. But I think we should turn our attention to the weather because there is actually a lot to talk about still. We talked about some of those watches and warnings. You can see that wind here extremely strong in the Strait of Georgia overnight tonight. You can see the west coast of the island also being hit pretty hard, although there's no wind warning there. It's for the North Island, Central Coast, and the in the Strait of Georgia. We're seeing both the east coast of the island and here in Metro Vancouver, as well as the Sunshine Coast, seeing those wind warnings that should stay in place until tomorrow afternoon, it looks like. Now, if we look here, we can see where that rain is coming. So this is what the model was saying for right now, which is fairly accurate compared to what we looked at on the radar earlier. You can see that rain here, that snow coming up and down at higher elevations on the coast. That is going to continue streaming in overnight. It does have a brief break. We continue to see some rain. It does taper off a little bit over the weekend until Sunday night here in Vancouver, but we do see all that snowfall coming across the interior throughout the weekend. So again, expect that buildup on those high mountain passes. If we take another look at that weather warning board, the text boxes are actually coming up now, which is helpful. You don't have to listen to me read it all out, but do expect that as we move towards the east, we're going to see more buildups of that snow, especially for Kootenay Pass at that higher elevation, going to see up to 30 centimeters. Other mountain passes, anywhere from 10 to 25 centimeters of snow expected. So again, you may need to adjust your travel plans this weekend if you are planning to go somewhere for the long weekend. Those rainfall warnings, you can't see all of them underneath the wind warning here, but for the North Shore and Howe Sound, as well as the Fraser Valley and parts of the east coast of the island. So it's a very busy weather weekend. Many of those warnings should come down by tomorrow, but again, for the interior, some of those mountain passes, expect to see those stay up for a while yet, right through the end of the weekend. And then here, if you look tomorrow, you can see that rain coming across. Doesn't quite capture some of the magnitude of the rain that is coming, but expect some storms on the coast as well. And if we look in Vancouver, you can see that we do have quite a bit of rain still coming our way. Potential for some breaks, especially on Monday and then next Wednesday, but expect quite a bit of rain even overnight Sunday into Monday. It's going to be a wet one.
Darius, it is Fun Fact Friday, so what do you have for us today?
You're right, it is a bit of a bleak forecast, so it is nice to have a little break. And today I want to talk about the sun. So if we take a look, we return back to our view of the Vancouver Mountains, and then we look to the east. You can see, let's see the sun rise, and look at what color it is. It's a dark red as it rises, and then it gets lighter and lighter as it heads up into the sky until it's a nice yellow, which is what we usually think of the sun as. If you ask a kid to draw the sun, that's probably what they'd say. But the sun is actually not yellow, nor is it red as it was down here. You can see that blue sky. That's because the sunlight is being scattered by the atmosphere, which is why the sky seems blue. Seems like an easy question, but the sky is not blue itself. It's because of that sunlight filtering in. If we watch the sun set again, as it sets and rises, you can see it has to go through more layers of the atmosphere, so more of that blue light gets scattered, which is why it looks darker. But if you were to zoom out to space, you'd actually see that the sun is not yellow. It's white, because the sun emits many different, or pretty much almost equally, all of the spectrum of visible light, which is why we've evolved to see visible light, because it's what the sun gives us the most of, so it's easiest to see. But you can see it does emit most strongly in the sort of blue-green part of the spectrum. So the answer to what color is the sun, to us, it would seem white if we were in space, but technically, it's really more of a turquoise, because that's what color it emits most strongly. So there's your Fun Fact Friday.
Thanks, Darius. I'm always learning from you.
Oh, what can I say?
5 premiers have signed a new letter demanding a meeting with the Prime Minister on the carbon tax exemption. Saskatchewan's Scott Moe says it's unfair as heat pumps don't work for cold prairie winters. Our Sam Sampson took a look at that claim.
You think this is a lot of snow for November? Jake Dingman knows more is coming.
So what are the 2 little posts here for?
Oh, they were just to mark it. In case it got buried in snow, I could find it.
His rural home just got a pricey upgrade. He moved from an old oil system to a heat pump last month.
So they come into the heat pump here.
The geothermal installation cost $45,000. For him, it's a better investment.
If I look back on the records, I have bills that are like $3,800.
Across Canada, about 7% of households use a heat pump. But in Saskatchewan, where most people rely on natural gas, that number is less than 1%. The Premier doesn't think that will change.
We asked the federal government to be fair to Canadian families.
He threatens not to collect the carbon tax next year unless Ottawa scraps the tax for all Canadians, a move many say would be illegal. The federal government recently paused the carbon tax on pricey home heating oil in hopes many would switch to heat pumps. But Mo is adamant that heat pumps don't work past -25, so his government won't offer rebates on them, saying they simply do not work as a primary heat source in the climate. Researchers are digging into that claim. Scientists in Canada's north are exploring heat pump feasibility for the Northwest Territories. There's a worry overall efficiency drops in extreme cold. Think -30.
It's where the industry is going.
HVAC experts say newer models do work in colder climates, but contractors say you may want a backup.
Where there's an existing gas furnace or any type of existing heating plant, they might recommend that you hang on to that. But to suggest that we cannot heat a home without natural gas or oil is false.
It's actually built in with a backup electric.
Dingman is confident his investment will pay off.
So what are you hoping to do with the money that you're hoping to save?
Go to Mexico. How's that for an environmental answer?
Sam Sampson, CBC News, near Saltcoats, Saskatchewan.
3 little pigs got lost in Texas, but where they found home wasn't made of straw, sticks, or even bricks. Their tale is next.
Let's say you're scrolling through your feed and you come across a post like this. Maybe there's a part of you that doubts what you're seeing and you start to wonder, is this even true? A post like this could be an example of misinformation. Misinformation is something inaccurate, the facts are simply wrong. Usually it's a mistake and it's not meant to harm anyone. Misinformation can look like a lot of things, for example, a joke or parody that someone took seriously, or a piece of information that doesn't come with the full story or is exaggerated, so it can be kind of misleading. There's also something called disinformation. That's when false information is spread on purpose. This could look like AI-generated content that's meant to trick you, like if someone made a deepfake of a public figure saying something they didn't, or imposter content trying to look like real news sources, or even clickbait, you know, those YouTube videos with the super dramatic titles that make you want to click, but the actual video doesn't seem to match the title, things like that. So you might be wondering, why would people want to spread false information? Well, for clickbait stuff, basically more clicks mean more money. In other cases, some people may share information out of context to back up their opinion on something. Or on the more extreme end, sometimes people want to control conversations about an issue or influence people for their own personal gain. So they might intentionally spread false information to trick people. Here's what you can do to make sure you're not spreading false information. 1. Look up the source. For example, if the link looks funky, that could be a red flag. Ask yourself, is the source who it says it is? Is it really trustworthy? Are they an expert on the topic? Trusted news sources have certain rules and standards to make sure what they're reporting is true and balanced. Number 2, search it up. A professional fact checker may have already looked into whether it's real or not. Number 3, check other sources. If a lot of experts and trusted sources are reporting the same thing, the information may be more reliable. So, remember that post we saw earlier? Do you think this could be misinformation? If so, just stop and take a second before you hit the share button.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
On December 7th, join CBC Vancouver's Dan Burrett at the Alumni UBC webinar, Finding Joy in Climate Action. Experts will discuss what climate actions we can take that could also impact our well-being. And enjoy the seasonal celebration of quiet reflection and jubilant hope with Christmas with Corleone on December 15th, 16th, and 18th. Tickets at corleone.org.
3 little pigs got lost in Texas recently, but managed to escape the clutches of the big bad wolf. They sought shelter under a car in a residential neighborhood.
I look under the car and I see just fur. And to me, it looks like a gray dog.
The owners of the car took a shine to the swine who were caught on a home security camera and fed them tortillas. The family members have been looking for the pigs' owners, but so far haven't had any luck. They have also contacted a wildlife rescue group that is willing to help if the owners aren't identified. Victoria heavy metal band Spirit Box is turning heads this week for receiving their first ever Grammy nomination. That was part of their single, Jaded, which clinched the Grammy nomination in the Best Metal Performance category. The Grammy Awards will air on February 4th. Thank you for joining us tonight on CBC News at 6. To keep up to date with news at any hour, you can always watch us on our free CBC Gem app, or of course head to our website at cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is at 11 o'clock after the National. Have a great night.